In a small, quiet town surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills, Sarah Callahan stood out, not because she was loud or flashy, but because of her calm confidence and the way she carried herself. She had served as a Marine for years, where she developed an unbreakable bond with military working dogs. After leaving the service, she decided to dedicate her life to training these incredible animals, teaching them skills that could save lives. Her reputation among those who truly understood her work was one of admiration, but not everyone saw her that way. On this particular sunny afternoon, Sarah was busy in an open field just outside of town. The golden sunlight bathed the area, casting long shadows across the grass. With her were 3 highly trained German shepherds, Blitz, Dagger, and Shadow. Each dog moved with precision, responding instantly to her every command. They weren't just pets, they were partners, extensions of her will. Together, they practiced search and rescue drills, obedience routines, and even mock protection scenarios. It was clear to anyone watching that these dogs trusted Sarah completely, and she trusted them in return. But not far away, trouble was brewing. A group of motorcyclists roared into view, their engines growling like thunder against the peaceful backdrop of the countryside. There were 5 of them, all dressed in leather jackets adorned with patches that screamed rebellion. Their leader, a burly man named Hank, sat at the front, his bald head gleaming under the sun. As they approached, their laughter grew louder, cutting through the serene atmosphere. At first, Sarah paid them no mind. She continued giving commands to her dogs, focusing on the task at hand. However, it didn't take long for the bikers to notice her. One of them pointed toward the field, and soon all eyes were on Sarah and her dogs. Well, what do we have here?" Tank called out, his deep voice dripping with mockery. His friends joined in, chuckling and making snide remarks. "Look at this little lady playing soldier," one of them jeered. Another added, "Maybe her dogs are more scared of her than us." Their words hung heavy in the air, designed to belittle and provoke. Despite their attempts to rattle her, Sarah remained composed. Her focus stayed on her dogs, guiding them through their exercises without missing a beat. Inside, though, she felt a flicker of frustration. These men didn't know her. They hadn't earned the right to judge her abilities or the capabilities of her dogs. Still, she chose not to engage. Experience had taught her that sometimes silence spoke louder than words. The dogs, however, were another story. Trained to pick up on their handlers' emotions, they sensed the shift in Sarah's demeanor. Blitz paused mid-stride during a retrieval exercise, his ears perking up as he glanced toward the noisy intruders. Dagger let out a low rumble deep in his throat, his body tensing slightly. Even Shadow, the gentlest of the trio, seemed uneasy. Sarah gave them a reassuring look, silently reminding them to stay focused. For now, the situation wasn't dangerous, but it was far from over. As the bikers continued their taunts, circling closer on their roaring bikes, the tension in the air became palpable. Something had to give. Would Sarah continue to ignore them, or would the bikers push too far? Either way, the stage was set for a showdown that neither side would forget anytime soon. The bikers, led by the imposing figure of Tank, were a group that thrived on intimidation. They prided themselves on their tough image, loud, brash, and unapologetic. To them, respect wasn't something you earned. It was something you demanded, often through sheer force of presence. And so, when they spotted Sarah in the field with her dogs, they saw an opportunity to assert their dominance. After all, what could a petite woman possibly do against 5 grown men, especially when she was surrounded by animals that looked more like overgrown pets than anything formidable? Tank revved his engine, the sound echoing across the open field like a challenge. His friends followed suit, creating a cacophony of noise that drowned out the peaceful chirping of birds and rustling of leaves. "Hey, sweetheart," Tank shouted, leaning forward on his bike with a grin plastered across his face. "What's a girl like you doing out here with those mutts? Shouldn't you be at home knitting or something?" The others erupted into laughter, clearly enjoying the spectacle they were making of themselves. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She continued guiding her dogs through their exercises, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Blitz retrieved a training dummy while Dagger patrolled the perimeter of the field, his sharp eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. Shadow stayed close to Sarah, occasionally glancing toward the bikers, but never losing focus on his handler. If anything, the dogs seemed more disciplined than ever, as if they understood the importance of staying calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. But the bikers weren't satisfied with being ignored. One of them, a wiry man with a scruffy beard, leaned back on his seat and cupped his hands around his mouth. "Yo, lady, maybe your dogs need some real handlers instead of someone who looks like they'd get blown over by the wind," he yelled, eliciting another round of guffaws from his companions. Another biker chimed in, "Yeah, maybe we should teach him how to act tough." Tank, eager to escalate things further, decided it was time to move closer. He signaled for his crew to form a loose semicircle around the edge of the field, effectively boxing Sarah and her dogs in. Their engines idled menacingly, sending vibrations through the ground. Despite their attempts to appear threatening, there was an unmistakable sense of immaturity in their behavior, like bullies on a playground trying to provoke someone smaller just for kicks. Finally, Sarah stopped what she was doing and turned to face them. Her expression was calm, almost serene, but there was a steeliness in her gaze that made even Tank hesitate for a moment. "You boys looking for something?" she asked, her voice steady and clear. There was no trace of fear or anger, just quiet authority. Tank recovered quickly, forcing a smirk onto his face. "Just wondering if those dogs of yours can actually do anything besides sit there and look pretty," he replied, his tone dripping with mockery. Encouraged by their leader's bravado, one of the bikers dismounted his bike and picked up a stick from the ground. He twirled it in his hand before tossing it toward Blitz, who had just returned from retrieving the training dummy. "Go fetch, boy," the man called out, laughing loudly at his own joke. The stick landed a few feet away from Blitz, but the dog didn't move. Instead, he glanced at Sarah, waiting for her command. The biker frowned, confused by the lack of reaction. "What's wrong, Pooch? Too scared to play?" Sarah crossed her arms, her patience wearing thin. "I'll say this once," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Leave now while you still can." Her words hung there, heavy with meaning. For a brief moment, the bikers exchanged uncertain looks, unsure whether to take her seriously. But then Tank broke the silence with a dismissive snort. "Or what?" he challenged, stepping off his bike and walking toward her. "What are you gonna do about it, huh?" The tension in the field reached a breaking point. The dogs, sensing their handler's resolve, shifted into defensive positions. Blitz lowered his body slightly, ready to spring into action if needed. Dagger let out a low growl, his teeth bared just enough to show he meant business. Even Shadow, usually the most docile of the trio, stood tall beside Sarah, his posture unwavering. The bikers might have thought they were dealing with an easy target, but they were about to discover just how wrong they were. In the days that followed, something remarkable began to happen in the small town. Word spread quickly about what had transpired between Sarah and the bikers in the field. At first, it was just whispers at the local diner or casual mentions during morning coffee runs. Stories about how a group of rough-looking motorcyclists had been humbled by a quiet woman and her extraordinary dogs. But soon, those whispers turned into conversations, and those conversations sparked change. Tank and his crew didn't return to their old ways. Instead, they became unlikely advocates for Sarah and her work. Whenever someone made a snide remark about her or questioned her abilities, they were quick to step in. "You don't know what you're talking about," Tank would say firmly, his voice carrying an authority no one dared to challenge. "That woman and her dogs could teach you a thing or two about respect." His words carried weight because they came from experience. People listened, even if reluctantly at first. The bikers also started spreading the word beyond the town limits. They told their friends at motorcycle clubs and pit stops along highways about the lessons they'd learned. It wasn't just about Sarah's skill as a handler. It was about the deeper message she embodied, that appearances can be deceiving, and underestimating someone often says more about you than it does about them. Slowly but surely, their stories reached ears far outside the small community, drawing attention to Sarah's training methods and the incredible bond she shared with her dogs. Sarah noticed the shift almost immediately. Strangers began stopping by her property, asking if they could watch a training session or learn more about her work. Some were locals, while others had traveled from neighboring towns after hearing tales of the dog whisperer who had stood up to a gang of bikers. She welcomed them all, not out of pride, but because she saw each visitor as an opportunity to share her passion and inspire others. Her dogs thrived on the attention, performing their routines with enthusiasm as crowds gathered to watch. One afternoon, Tank showed up unexpectedly, this time alone. He parked his bike near the edge of the field and walked over to where Sarah was working with Blitz. "Got a favor to ask," he said, scratching the back of his neck nervously. Sarah raised an eyebrow, but motioned for him to continue. "There's a kid in our neighborhood. His name's Liam. He's got a tough home life, always getting into trouble. Thought maybe, I dunno, maybe spending some time around your dogs might help him. Show him there's another way, no?" Sarah studied Tank for a moment, surprised by the sincerity in his request. Then she smiled. "Bring him by," she said simply. "We'll see what we can do." Liam arrived the following week, a scrawny boy with shaggy hair and wary eyes. At first, he kept his distance, unsure of both Sarah and the dogs. But over time, he opened up, drawn in by the warmth and patience of the animals and the steady guidance of their handler. Watching him interact with the dogs, Sarah saw glimpses of herself years ago. Someone searching for direction, yearning for connection. And just like her, Liam found it in the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Months later, when Liam proudly announced that he wanted to become a K-9 officer someday, Sarah felt a swell of pride, not just for him, but for everyone whose lives had been touched by her work. Tank attended the boys' school presentation, sitting quietly in the back row with tears in his eyes. "Never thought I'd see the day," he admitted afterward, shaking his head in wonder. But here we are. As the seasons changed, so did the town. The once divided community grew closer, united by newfound respect for Sarah, for her dogs, and for the power of understanding. The bikers remained regular visitors, volunteering their time to help maintain Sarah's training grounds and assisting with outreach programs she started for troubled youth. They weren't perfect, but they were trying. And sometimes, that was enough. For Sarah, the journey wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about making a difference, one person and one dog at a time. As she watched the sun set over the fields, her loyal companions resting peacefully beside her, she knew she had done exactly that. Life wasn't always easy, but with trust, determination, and a little bit of heart, anything was possible, even turning adversaries into allies. The next morning, Sarah woke up earlier than usual. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the earthy scent of dew-kissed grass. She prepared for the day with a sense of quiet anticipation, knowing that Tank and his crew would be arriving soon. Her dogs seemed to sense her mood. They were unusually alert, pacing around the cabin as if eager to get started. After feeding them and double-checking their gear, Sarah stepped outside into the golden light of dawn. The field where she trained her dogs stretched out before her, bathed in soft sunlight, peaceful yet full of potential. True to their word, the bikers arrived just as the sun began its climb above the horizon. Their motorcycles rumbled into view, but this time there was no arrogance in their approach, no loud revving or swaggering postures. Instead, they parked quietly at the edge of the field, dismounted, and walked toward Sarah with hesitant steps. Tank led the group, his leather jacket replaced by a plain denim one, and he carried himself with an unfamiliar humility. Behind him, His friends shuffled awkwardly, glancing at each other as if unsure how to behave. "Morning," Tank said, his voice low and respectful. "We're here like you asked." He gestured vaguely to his crew, who nodded in unison. Sarah gave him a brief nod in return, hiding a small smile at their obvious effort to appear less intimidating. "All right," she replied evenly. "Let's see if you can learn something today." With that, she turned her attention to her dogs. Blitz, Dagger, and Shadow stood nearby, watching the newcomers with cautious curiosity. Sarah signaled for them to begin their routine, starting with basic obedience drills. The dogs responded instantly, moving with precision and grace. Each command was met with flawless execution, whether it was sitting, staying, or retrieving objects from specific locations. The bikers watched in silence, their initial skepticism slowly giving way to fascination. Tank crossed his arms, leaning slightly forward as he observed. "They really listened to every word," he muttered under his breath, clearly impressed. One of his friends nudged him. "Yeah, and they don't even need treats or anything," the man added, sounding genuinely amazed. Sarah overheard their comments but didn't interrupt. She wanted them to draw their own conclusions without her explaining everything right away. After the warm-up exercises, Sarah moved on to more advanced tasks. She set up a mock search and rescue scenario, scattering items across the field and instructing her dogs to locate them using only scent cues. Blitz took the lead, his nose working tirelessly as he weaved through the tall grass. Within minutes, he had found all the hidden objects and brought them back to Sarah, his tail wagging proudly. Dagger followed with a tracking exercise, demonstrating his ability to follow a trail left hours earlier. Even Shadow, the gentlest of the trio, showed off his skills by identifying subtle changes in body language during a simulated protection drill. As the demonstration continued, the bikers grew increasingly animated. They asked questions between exercises, their earlier bravado replaced by genuine curiosity. "How long does it take to train them like this?" one biker wondered aloud. Another chimed in. "Do they ever get distracted? Like, what if there's food around?" Sarah answered patiently, explaining the importance of consistency, trust, and positive reinforcement. She emphasized that training wasn't about domination. It was about building a partnership based on mutual respect. By the end of the session, the transformation in the bikers was undeniable. They weren't the same rowdy group that had mocked Sarah just a day ago. Instead, they seemed humbled and inspired, eager to understand rather than judge. Tank approached Sarah as the others packed up their bikes. "Thanks for showing us this," he said sincerely. "I never realized how much work goes into something like this, or how incredible these dogs really are." Sarah looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "Respect isn't given freely," she reminded him gently. "It's earned, and it works both ways." Tank held her gaze, nodding slowly. For the first time, he truly understood what she meant. As the bikers rode off, their engines quieter than before, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not because she had proven herself, but because she had planted a seed of understanding. Sometimes, all it took was a little patience to change someone's perspective. And maybe, just maybe, make the world a better place. The sun had long disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the world bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Sarah and her dogs returned to her modest home on the outskirts of town, a cozy cabin surrounded by tall trees that swayed gently in the evening breeze. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and dog fur, a testament to the life she shared with her loyal companions. After feeding Blitz, Dagger, and Shadow, Sarah settled into her favorite chair near the window, gazing out at the darkening sky. Her mind replayed the events of the day, the mocking laughter of the bikers, their taunts, and the tense standoff in the field. She didn't dwell on it with anger or resentment. Instead, she thought about what it revealed about human nature. People often judged others based on appearances, assuming they knew someone's capabilities without ever truly seeing them. It was a lesson she'd learned herself during her time in the Marines, where she'd faced skepticism from peers who doubted her abilities as a woman in a male-dominated world. But overcoming those doubts had shaped her into the person she was today, resilient, patient, and unshakable. As she sat there lost in thought, a distant rumble broke the quiet of the night. At first, she dismissed it as thunder rolling across the hills. But then she heard it again, the unmistakable growl of motorcycle engines. Her heart skipped a beat. Had the bikers returned for more? She rose from her chair and moved toward the door, her dogs instantly alert and following close behind. Peering through the small window beside the entrance, she saw headlights approaching her driveway. Sure enough, it was Tank and his crew, riding slowly this time, their posture far less aggressive than earlier. Sarah exhaled deeply, steeling herself for whatever might come next. If they wanted another confrontation, she was ready, but something about their demeanor felt different. They parked their bikes carefully, almost hesitantly, and dismounted one by one. Tank stepped forward, holding something in his hands. It wasn't a weapon or anything threatening. It was a bouquet of wildflowers, tied together with a piece of twine. He looked awkward clutching them, as if unsure whether he was doing the right thing. Sarah opened the door cautiously, her dog standing protectively in front of her. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice firm but not hostile. Tank cleared his throat, visibly struggling to find the right words. "Look," he began, shifting uncomfortably under her steady gaze. We were wrong earlier. About everything. We shouldn't have messed with you or your dogs. That was disrespectful, and I'm sorry." His apology hung in the air, raw and unexpected. Behind him, the other bikers nodded in agreement, their expressions sheepish. Sarah studied them for a moment, searching for sincerity in their eyes. What she found surprised her. They weren't just apologizing because they'd been scared off earlier. They genuinely seemed remorseful. Perhaps the encounter had forced them to confront their own behavior, making them realize how hollow their bravado truly was. After a pause, Sarah stepped aside and gestured for them to come closer. "You're lucky my dogs are better behaved than most people," she said dryly, earning a nervous laugh from the group. Tank handed her the wildflowers, looking both relieved and embarrassed. "These are for you," he mumbled. "It's not much, but, well, it's all we could think of." Sarah accepted the bouquet with a small smile. "Thank you," she replied simply. Then, after a beat, she added, "If you really mean what you say, stick around. Watch a training session tomorrow morning. Maybe you'll understand why my dogs don't need sticks thrown at them. They've got skills worth respecting." Tank blinked, taken aback by the invitation. "You'd let us watch?" he asked, incredulous. Sarah shrugged. "Why not? Everyone deserves a chance to learn." His face softened, and for the first time that day, he smiled, not a smirk, but a genuine expression of gratitude. As the bikers climbed back onto their motorcycles to leave, promising to return in the morning, Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, the bouquet still in her hand. Her dogs looked up at her expectantly, tails wagging. "Looks like we got some new students tomorrow," she said with a chuckle. The thought brought her comfort. Sometimes, even the hardest hearts could be reached with patience and understanding. And maybe, just maybe, these men would carry the lesson forward, spreading respect instead of ridicule. Tank's confidence seemed unshakable as he took another step forward, his boots crunching against the dry grass. He was used to people backing down when confronted by him and his crew. Whether it was a nervous shopkeeper or a group of teenagers loitering near their favorite hangout spot, Tank had always gotten his way through sheer intimidation. But Sarah wasn't like anyone he'd encountered before. Her calm demeanor only fueled his frustration, and he decided it was time to push harder. "Come on, lady," Tank said, his voice rising slightly. "You think standing there all quiet makes you look tough. Prove it. Show us what those dogs can really do." His words were meant to provoke, but Sarah didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she gave him a long, measured look, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. For the first time, Tank felt a flicker of doubt. Still, he couldn't back down now, not in front of his friends. One of the bikers, emboldened by Tank's bravado, decided to take things further. He grabbed another stick from the ground and hurled it directly at Dagger, who stood closest to him. The stick whistled through the air, aimed squarely at the dog's head. But before it could even come close, something extraordinary happened. Blitz, Sarah's lead German shepherd, sprang into action with lightning speed. In one fluid motion, he leaped high into the air, intercepting the stick mid-flight and landing gracefully on all fours. The entire field fell silent for a split second as everyone, including the bikers, stared in stunned disbelief. Tank blinked, momentarily speechless. He hadn't expected such precision, such control. But rather than admit he might have underestimated Sarah and her dogs, he doubled down. "Okay, so your mutt can catch sticks. Big deal," he muttered, though his tone lacked its earlier swagger. To cover his unease, he signaled for two of his buddies to join him. They dismounted their bikes and began spreading out, forming a loose semicircle around Sarah and her dogs. Their body language screamed aggression, but Sarah remained unfazed. She let out a sharp whistle, cutting through the tension like a blade. At the sound, her dogs immediately snapped to attention. Blitz positioned himself slightly ahead of her, his muscles coiled like springs. Dagger moved to her left flank, his teeth bared in a low, rumbling growl. Shadow stayed by her side, his gaze fixed intently on the approaching bikers. Each dog radiated power and discipline, their loyalty to Sarah evident in every movement. Tank hesitated for a moment, glancing at his friends. None of them looked particularly eager to move closer now, but none of them wanted to appear weak either. With a grunt, Tank took another step forward, attempting to assert his dominance once more. "All right, fine," he said, forcing a smirk. "Let's see what these fancy dogs of yours can really do. Or are they just gonna stand there and bark?" Sarah didn't respond verbally. Instead, she raised her hand slightly, giving a subtle signal only her dogs understood. In response, Dagger stepped forward, his massive frame blocking Tank's path. The biker froze, suddenly face to face with a creature that exuded raw strength and intelligence. Dagger didn't lunge or snap. He simply stared at Tank, his piercing eyes unwavering. It was enough to make Tank stumble backward, tripping over his own feet in his haste to retreat. The other bikers exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do next. One of them tried to throw another stick, hoping to regain some semblance of control, but Blitz intercepted it effortlessly once again. This time, the dog dropped the stick at Sarah's feet, sitting beside her with perfect posture. The message was clear. These animals weren't just trained. They were exceptional, and they answered to no one but their handler. Tank clenched his fists, his frustration boiling over. He had walked into this situation expecting an easy victory, a chance to mock and humiliate someone he saw as weaker. But instead, he found himself facing a force he couldn't comprehend. Sarah's quiet authority, combined with the undeniable skill of her dogs, left him floundering. And yet, despite his growing discomfort, he refused to back down entirely. There was still pride at stake, and pride, for men like Tank, was worth almost anything. As the standoff continued, the atmosphere grew heavier. The bikers weren't laughing anymore. Their earlier bravado had faded, replaced by uncertainty and a dawning realization that they might have bitten off more than they could chew. Sarah, meanwhile, stood tall, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to say a word. Her dogs spoke volumes for her. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The lesson was far from over. Tank's voice cracked as he shouted, "Fine. We'll leave you alone, okay? Just call off your monsters." His words hung in the air, heavy with both frustration and a reluctant acknowledgement of defeat. The once cocky biker leader now looked more like a cornered animal than the intimidating figure he had tried so hard to project. His face was flushed, his hands trembling slightly as he gestured for his crew to back away. But even as he issued the command to retreat, it was clear that none of them were eager to test Sarah's dogs or her resolve any further. Sarah didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stood tall, her posture relaxed but commanding. Her gaze swept over the bikers, taking in their disheveled appearances and uneasy expressions. She knew they weren't truly dangerous, not in the way she had faced danger during her time in the Marines, but their arrogance had been toxic, fueled by ignorance and misplaced bravado. Still, she wasn't interested in gloating or humiliating them further. This wasn't about revenge. It was about teaching a lesson. With a calm, measured tone, Sarah addressed Tank directly. "I warned you," she said simply, her voice carrying just enough weight to make him flinch. "You chose not to listen. Now you know what happens when you underestimate someone or their dogs." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "You can go now. But if I ever see you around here again causing trouble, we won't be this polite." The word polite seemed almost laughable given the circumstances, but Sarah meant it sincerely. Her dogs hadn't attacked anyone. They hadn't needed to. Their mere presence, combined with their impeccable training, had been enough to neutralize the situation without resorting to violence. Blitz, Dagger, and Shadow returned to her side, sitting attentively as if awaiting their next command. To an outsider, they might have appeared calm and docile, but the bikers knew better. These animals were forces of nature, restrained only by their handler's will. Tank swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly as he nodded stiffly. Yeah, okay," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. He turned to his crew, who were already scrambling back toward their bikes. One of them tripped over his own feet in his haste to escape, earning a few nervous chuckles from his friends, though no one dared laugh too loudly. Even Spike, the wiry biker who had thrown sticks earlier, kept his head down as he climbed onto his bike. As the group mounted their motorcycles, there was none of the usual revving of engines or loud taunts that had marked their arrival. Instead, they moved quietly, quickly, eager to put distance between themselves and the field. Tank lingered for a moment longer, casting one last glance at Sarah and her dogs. There was something in his expression, a mix of shame, disbelief, and perhaps even a flicker of respect, that made Sarah pause. She didn't say anything, though. Sometimes silence spoke louder than words. Once the bikers had roared off into the distance, the field fell silent once more. The tension that had gripped the area moments ago dissipated, replaced by the soothing sounds of rustling leaves and chirping birds. Sarah took a deep breath, allowing herself a small smile. Her dogs, sensing the shift in mood, relaxed completely. Blitz wagged his tail gently, while Dagger let out a soft huff, lying down beside her. Shadow nudged her hand affectionately, seeking reassurance after the ordeal. For Sarah, this moment wasn't just about victory, it was about understanding. She knew that people like Tank often acted out of insecurity, masking their weaknesses with aggression and posturing. It wasn't excusable, but it was human. And while she hoped the bikers had learned something valuable today, she also recognized that real change rarely happened overnight. What mattered most was that they had left unharmed, humbled but not broken. Turning to her dogs, Sarah knelt down and gave each of them a gentle pat on the head. "Good job, team," she said softly, her voice filled with pride. "You handled yourselves perfectly." The dogs responded with quiet enthusiasm, their loyalty unwavering. Together, they had proven that strength wasn't always about size or noise. It was about discipline, trust, and knowing when to act. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah gathered her training equipment and prepared to head home. The day had been eventful, but she felt a sense of fulfillment. Not because she had bested a group of arrogant bikers, but because she had reminded them, and herself, of the power of respect. And as she walked back toward her truck, her dogs trotting happily at her side, she couldn't help but feel hopeful that maybe, just maybe, the encounter would leave a lasting impression on those who had come looking for trouble. The standoff between Sarah and the bikers had reached a tipping point. Tank, though visibly shaken by Dagger's imposing presence, wasn't ready to admit defeat. He glanced at his friends, silently urging them to step up and help him regain control of the situation. But none of them looked eager to move closer. Their earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by uncertainty as they watched Blitz and Dagger stand guard with unwavering focus. Even Shadow, who usually seemed more docile, now radiated quiet intensity. Realizing he couldn't rely on his crew, Tank decided to take matters into his own hands. "All right, fine," he growled, trying to mask his unease with false confidence. "If your dogs are so tough, show us what they've got." His voice carried a challenge, but it lacked its earlier bite. He pointed toward one of his buddies, a wiry man named Spike, and barked, "You, toss something else at him. Let's see how good they really are." Spike hesitated, clearly reluctant to provoke the dogs further. But under Tank's glare, he reluctantly bent down and picked up another stick. This time, however, instead of throwing it directly at the dogs, he hurled it far to the side, aiming for an empty patch of grass. It was a deliberate attempt to make the dogs chase after it, hoping to expose some flaw in their training or discipline. The stick soared through the air, landing with a soft thud several feet away. Sarah didn't say a word. Instead, she gave a sharp whistle followed by a single command. "Stay." Her voice rang out clear and firm, leaving no room for misinterpretation. To everyone's surprise, not least the bikers, the dogs didn't budge. Blitz remained rooted in place, his gaze steady and alert. Dagger stayed low to the ground, his eyes locked onto the bikers like a predator sizing up its prey. Even Shadow sat perfectly still, his ears perked up as if waiting for further instructions. None of them showed any interest in chasing the stick. Tank frowned, clearly thrown off balance. "What kind of trick is this?" he muttered, scratching the back of his neck. "Dogs are supposed to chase stuff." One of his friends chimed in nervously. "Yeah, maybe they're broken or something." Sarah finally spoke, her tone calm but laced with authority. "These aren't ordinary dogs," she said simply. "They don't act unless I tell them to. And right now, my command is stay." As if to prove her point, she signaled Blitz to retrieve the stick. In an instant, the dog sprang into action, sprinting across the field with breathtaking speed. He grabbed the stick in his jaws and returned to Sarah in seconds, dropping it neatly at her feet before resuming his position beside her. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier mockery replaced by growing apprehension. They were beginning to realize that these animals weren't just trained. They were highly disciplined, responding to Sarah's every word with precision and loyalty. Still, Tank refused to back down. He turned to his crew and gestured for them to surround Sarah and her dogs. "Let's see how tough they are when we outnumber them," he sneered, though there was a hint of desperation in his voice. As the bikers spread out, encircling the field, Sarah remained composed. She gave another whistle, this time sharper and louder. At the sound, her dogs shifted positions almost imperceptibly, forming a protective barrier around her. Blitz positioned himself slightly ahead, his body coiled like a spring. Dagger moved to her left flank, while Shadow took up a spot on her right. Each dog radiated readiness, their muscles taut and their eyes fixed on the approaching threat. Tank signaled for two of his men to move in from opposite sides, attempting to flank Sarah. But before they could get close, she issued a series of crisp commands. Blitz lunged forward, cutting off one biker's path with such speed that the man stumbled backward in shock. Dagger mirrored the movement, intercepting the other biker and forcing him to retreat. Neither dog made physical contact. They didn't need to. Their sheer presence and controlled aggression were enough to send the men scrambling. The remaining bikers froze, unsure of what to do next. Tank clenched his fists, his frustration boiling over. "Fine," he shouted, throwing his arms up in exasperation. We'll leave you alone, okay? Just call off your monsters." Despite his bluster, there was no mistaking the fear in his voice. For the first time, he realized he underestimated not only Sarah, but also the incredible bond she shared with her dogs. Sarah held her ground, her expression unreadable. She gave a final whistle, and her dogs immediately relaxed, returning to her side. The tension in the air began to dissipate, but the lesson was clear. Respect wasn't given, it was earned. And the bikers had just learned that the hard way.